Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 400, and my guest is Brian Fairchild. Brian is a retired CIA agent who held top secret clearance from the Department of Defense. He's a counter-terrorism expert, and during the decade immediately following the 9/11 attacks, Brian trained over 10,000 FBI, CIA, and military personnel, as well as state and local police intelligence officers. He served in Kabul, Afghanistan, where he mentored Afghan National Police intelligence officers. He's also the author of the spy thriller, The Hidden. We talked about dysfunction in the intelligence agencies, how to recruit spies, thoughts on China, and more. It was really interesting. I'm so thrilled to have had a chance to talk with him. I'm always incredibly curious about the lives of people in this line of work. So I'm really excited for this episode. Check out heyhumanpodcast.com for links and to learn more about my guests and the show. Check out susanruth.com to learn more about me and my other artistic endeavors. Follow Susan Ruthism and Hey Human Podcast on social media. Find my albums on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your music. Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening. Be well, be kind, be love, and here we go. Brian Fairchild, welcome to Hey Human.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to meet you.
Yeah, it's great to meet you as well. I'm so glad you could be on the show. Your life story is intriguing and fascinating and an adventure and everything in between. So I'm really excited to jump in, but I like to start these conversations by finding out what shaped the person I'm speaking with, and especially because of your choice of career paths.
Yeah, well, the origin story, the CIA origin story, is that when I was 13 years old, I was living in Mesa, Arizona. And it's hot in Mesa, Arizona. Desert, saguaro cacti everywhere, that kind of thing. So I'm a kid. I'm growing up in the desert, and I read a book, and I want to make this point because to all your listeners, especially any kids who are listening, read as much as you can, because when you read, you get, it incites your imagination. It gives you the ability to write and so forth and so on, but it takes you anywhere. You can go anywhere if you read. So when I was 13, sitting in Mesa, Arizona, I read Jack London's Call of the Wild. And Jack London's Call of the Wild is a story about a kid up in the Klondike and his mush dog, Buck, and their adventures. You can imagine me sitting there in the desert reading about the Klondike and pine forests and snow and mush dogs and, all the exciting things that were going on, with this guy and his dog. And so at that particular point in time, I was sold. I was like, I'm not going to stay here in Arizona. I'm going to go for a life of adventure. I'm going to find Buck somewhere, my own Buck, and go that way. Shortly thereafter, we moved to Boulder, Colorado. And in Boulder, Colorado, I turned 14. I went to the movies. I went to see the very first James Bond movie with Sean Connery. It was From Russia with Love. And I got to tell you, Susan, right there, I was hooked. I mean, that just completely captured my imagination. It was filmed in Istanbul, Turkey. Foreign languages were being spoken, accents were being used, different costumes, characters had different costumes. And then, of course, the James Bond figure, Sean Connery was doing all kinds of cool things like, checking for bugs in his, listening devices in his room. And he and his liaison guy from the Turkish service went down into the bowels of Istanbul in these underground passages, and they had like a submarine periscope that would come up into the Soviet embassy, so they could spy on the Soviets through this periscope and stuff. And of course, he got the girl. That was a big deal too. So at 14 years old, I decided that's what I want to do. I want to be one of those spy guys. And so as soon as the movie was over, and this was a long time ago, this was long before computers and iPhones or anything like that. So as soon as the movie was over, I made a beeline to the Boulder Public Library, put on my most innocent face, and went up to the librarian and said, Miss Librarian, could you please help me find stuff about the CIA? And she was all for it. She's got periodicals and lined them up and showed me the articles and the periodicals and whatever books they had. Of course, there were no books for 14-year-old wannabes, wannabe spies. It was all pretty much serious, adult stuff. But I read all that stuff, and I went into those books and I searched page by page to find someone that resembled Sean Connery's 007. I couldn't do it. I couldn't find it. So I figured I got to know. I got to figure this out. So what I did is I went to the yellow pages. Back then we had yellow pages, and you'd find federal listings and things. And I found and I was living in Boulder, Colorado, so I found the federal listing in Denver for the Central Intelligence Agency, a post office box. And I sat down with a pencil and some lined notebook paper, and I printed a letter to the CIA. And I can't remember exactly what I said, but I said something like, "Dear CIA, I'm a 14-year-old student at Centennial Junior High School in Boulder, Colorado, and I've decided I want to be a spy. How do I do that? Sincerely, Brian Fairchild." And I got a stamp from my mom, put it on the envelope, and I mailed it. And that was a good thing. That's another sort of life lesson. It's like, if you don't take the shot, you're never going to get anywhere. Maybe nothing's going to happen, but I might as well take the shot. So I mailed it off, and I sort of forgot about it for a while. And 2 weeks later, I came home, and my mom had gotten this letter and put it on my pillow in my bedroom. And it was from the Central Intelligence Agency, and it was on colored envelopes and stationery. And, it said Central Intelligence Agency, post office box, whatever, Washington, D.C. And I glanced and I saw it was addressed to Mr. Fairchild. And right away, Susan, I was terrified. I'm like, oh my God, the CIA is writing to my dad, to basically say, hey, get your kid to knock this stuff off. We don't need pencil requirement, that sort of thing. And because the only Mr. Fairchild I had ever known was my dad, right? Nobody called me, 14 years old, Mr. Fairchild. So I opened the letter to see how much trouble I was in. And I found a 2-page typed plan written specific to my penciled request for how to get into the CIA, written by a guy, and this is absolutely true, Michael Todorovich. Now, you can't get a better CIA name than Michael Todorovich, especially for a 14-year-old kid who had just watched From Russia with Love, right? All these Russians going around going, and well, Brian, Todorovich, Mikhail Todorovich, that sort of thing. And here's Michael Todorovich from CIA writing me a letter. And it was a plan, and I subsequently called it the Todorovich Plan. And it started out, as you might imagine. He said, "Dear Brian, it's great that young Americans like yourself would like to serve the government, and in this case, especially CIA. And here's my advice to you: stay in junior high school." Okay, that's check. Go on to high school, and when you're in high school, apply yourself and learn as much as you can. I figured, okay, that's good. If you go to the university, I would recommend that you take international politics or area studies, and you're going to need a language. So, choose a language and study that language. In fact, you can start that anytime. You don't have to wait until you go to college. And military is good. So, if you get into the military, that's a good thing for us. And 6 months prior to you wanting to accept, employment with the Central Intelligence Agency, get back in touch and we'll do your polygraph and we'll bring you on board. And I'm like, whoa, I'm going to be in the CIA. I got a letter. Later, when I got into the CIA, I told my colleagues about this, and they all knew him. Mike, yeah, Mike Todorovich. He was in Denver for a while, wasn't he? Oh, he's a great case officer. What a good man, that sort of thing. So the guy was absolutely right and a real guy, and it wasn't even an alias. And he took the time to respond to a 14-year-old kid's penciled request. So I thought, that's great, and I'll tell that story for as long as I live and to as many kids as I can tell it to, because take the shot for one thing, and there are people out there who want to help you and will do things for you, like this guy did for me.
And kudos to him, because any other person, perhaps that letter gets across their desk and they just giggle and send you a hat or a pin or something.
Or wouldn't even do that. They just rip it up and send it and put it. But this guy sat down and typed a 2-page letter, specifically, to me, how to get into the CIA. And it worked. That's the key. It worked. The Todorovich plan worked. So that as I was growing up and I was going to all those things, going through high school, and I did exactly what he said. I became a Green Beret, and I went into the 19th Special Forces Group. At that time, it was situated at Buckley Air National Guard Base in Denver. So I got into that. So I had the military check mark, getting into college and taking what I was going to take. I had a dual major in international relations and Asian studies. And I had been an exchange student in my junior year at university and to Taiwan. And so I had obtained operational fluency in Mandarin Chinese. I had international relations, Asian studies, a language, and been overseas because I had been in Taiwan as an exchange student. And CIA is very it's like a tier 1 agency, right? It's like trying to get into SEAL Team 6 or Delta Force or IBM or whatever you're shooting for. I mean, it's a they only take a few people from all the people that send in applications. But I had something that none of those guys had. All those guys that were applying from Yale and Harvard and all these cool places and had all these cool things that they could say about themselves. But I had the Todorovich plan, and it carried the day. And they said, welcome on board. And I raised my hand and took the oath to defend the Constitution and became a member of the clandestine service. So
please tell me that you got to meet Todorovich at some point.
No, I didn't. By the time I got in, he was already retired.
But even after the fact, you didn't find him somewhere out there?
No, I didn't. I mean, but remember, I was 14 years old when I got that. I was 25 years old when I got into the CIA. So a lot of time had passed.
Sure.
And I was sitting on the Taiwan desk at CIA headquarters, having just joined CIA shortly before that. And I was talking to the guy who was the chief of the desk, and I told him this story. And he said, I know Michael Todorovich. Yeah, he and I were in the same class going through the farm. And, it was that kind of thing. But he'd retired long before I got in, and nobody had any contact information for him. But I did. To your point, there was another guy at the same time. There was a guy by the name of Clayton Tony Lamb. And Tony Lamb had been a bobby in the London police force. And now, when I was 14, he was a private investigator in Boulder, Colorado. And this was, just like I went from the movie theater to the library. Now I'm into it. Now I got a letter from CIA. I'm going to be a spy one of these days. And I'm talking to people, as many people as I can, to find out as much as I can about anything like that. So I called up Tony Lamb and I said, hey, my name's Brian Fairchild, and I'm a 14-year-old guy, and da-da-da-da. He said, come on by. So I went downtown and I went to his office, and the guy took me in and he gave me his best advice. And he said, he told me about surveillance, and above Boulder, Colorado is the Rocky Mountains. I mean, to the west is the Rocky Mountains, and there's an overlook, a sort of a lovers parking place and overlook. And he said, he was saying, as far as following people and stuff, he says, I go up to to that overlook, and I get my cameras and I set up, and all of Boulder is just lined out in front of me, and I can follow people all over the city just with my cameras. I don't have to be following them. I can follow them all over the city, wherever they go. And so I thought, well, that's pretty cool. And then he said, well, have you done any self-defense things or anything? And I said, no. He said, well, across the street over here is this dojo. And Tony says, I'm taking jujitsu lessons over there. You might want to look into that, So that's when I got involved in martial arts, and, subsequently did that and got together with some Chinese students at Colorado University, CU, and, on the campus. And they taught me Kung Fu, and I started that whole lifelong thing, But when I got into the CIA, to show you how cool this is, as the story evolves, after my first two assignments overseas, I got assigned to Denver, the same office that Michael Todorovich had been in when he wrote to me all those years before. Part of my responsibility was going to Boulder and talking to contacts and things in Boulder. And I sought Tony Lamb out. And, the interesting thing is he made such an impression on me and he was important to me, but he didn't remember the incident at all. When I told him, I said, yeah, I don't know if you remember me, but, when I was 14, I came to your office and he didn't. To me, to him, I was just a blip. I was something that, oh yeah, nice kid. Okay, see you later. And he never gave it a second thought. But for me, I'm still telling the story. But I did look him up specifically, and I thanked him for taking an interest and giving me his guidance, and we shook hands, and I never saw him again. But
it's wild that at 14 you had such a perseverance and a determination. I'm sure I just picture this kid and his family doing little spy games.
Well, I followed people around town and at the mall. I mean, I got in trouble for it too. If you follow the wrong people, like, girls, and they figure out that you're following them and they tell somebody, it's like, are you stalking this poor young lady? I wasn't. No, I was just practicing my surveillance techniques. But yeah, I mean, it was that kind of a deal. But I read everything I could from that point on, and then I got in. And once I got in, one of the things I regret is I used to sleep with that letter under my pillow. But then once you do these things, once you get in, those letters seem less important, right? Because now it's not an aspirational thing. You're already there. You're one of them. You're in it deep. So I misplaced that letter somewhere, and now it's very valuable to me. I mean, I would love to find that letter again. My parents passed away. I was overseas. My brother put stuff in storage, and we've never been able to find that letter again. But if I can, I mean, I will. I'll frame it. I'll gild it and frame it. Because now it's important. Which is another thing to remember. Is like, hold on to those things when you're a kid. Don't think just because you're going to get into something or become a Green Beret that this stuff isn't important. I mean, take those things and save them because they're very important.
Did you have a generally patriotic family that you came from, or was it run of the mill?
No, it was a run of the mill. I mean, my dad had done different things at the time that we were in Denver. My dad was an iron worker, and I was the first one who went to college in the family, and and got my diploma. Although I had a hard time getting out of high school, but that's another whole story. But I did get out of high school, and I did get my degree, my high school diploma. And then I got into Cal State at Chico and graduated with highest honors in international relations. So, I mean, it all sort of came together. But yeah, I wasn't, but it wasn't a military family or anything like that. But, I was patriotic. My brothers were patriotic. My younger brother subsequently went into the Air Force and Office of Special Investigations, and then became the chief of all criminal investigations in Montana, for the state of Montana. So, he followed his dream and I followed mine. My older brother, something else. He just did something else, But the two of us, we stayed true to that kind of a concept. And I would be still working today if it wasn't for the fact that CIA, downsized, and after the fall of the Soviet Union, I tried everything I could to stay, and they said, no, we want you guys to leave.
Well, I imagine that these days they're maybe regretting that decision and maybe bulking it back up again.
Yeah, well, they are. They're rebuilding, but now they're not so happy with me because I've written to them on numerous occasions, written papers critical of CIA, because CIA is really not doing what it's supposed to be doing now. So even if they needed somebody that had my requirements, they probably wouldn't choose me.
What is the difference between CIA and FBI? Because I think a lot of people confuse those two agencies.
Yeah, absolutely different. The FBI, well, here's an excellent question, and there's several reasons why. A lot of people refer to the CIA guys who work in CIA as CIA agents, and that's not what we are. No, we never call ourselves CIA agents. We're CIA officers, or we're operations officers, or clandestine service officers, but we never call ourselves agents. Agents are law enforcement type guys. Like the guys in the FBI are special agents of the FBI. Guys in, immigration service are special agents of the, immigration service. Or DEAs are special agents in the DEA. But CIA are clandestine service officers, case officers, ops officers, CIA officers. And that's important because when we refer to agents, we refer to the foreigners that we've recruited overseas to penetrate foreign governments so that our government gets their secrets. So we refer to them as agents. So that's, so to call a guy like me a CIA agent is just, completely skewed backwards. I mean, I'm the officer. I go and recruit the spies who are our agents. And the FBI is a law enforcement organization. Their charter is the federal laws, and anybody who breaks federal laws, they're going to investigate the federal laws, develop evidence, bring a case against somebody, go to the attorney general or the prosecuting attorneys and give their cases to the federal prosecuting attorneys, and if they have enough evidence and can prove their case, then they bring it to trial and so forth and so on. But the CIA isn't anything like that. What the CIA is guys like me who go overseas, speak foreign languages, understand foreign cultures, understand foreign politics and regional politics and the politics of our enemies especially. And then we try to find people that have access to secret information about those people, about our targets, and we try to recruit them. So to give you an example, if you, Susan, were a target of mine, if I had met you and you were in Bahrain, and you're in the Ministry of Economy in Bahrain, and I'm, in the U.S. Embassy, covered as a diplomat, covered as a political officer, and in the course of my duties, I get to know you, and it seems like we kind of hit it off, and we're on the same wavelengths and stuff. So I will build a relationship with you, and then as I build a relationship with you, I find out, your husband needs an operation that you can't afford. The baby needs a new pair of shoes, that kind of thing. And then if you have access, and then we're talking about government, we're talking about politics and stuff. And a couple of times you look at me and say, well, look, Brian, I'm going to tell you this stuff. Don't tell anybody I told you this, and then you give me a couple of secrets. Right. And so I'm like, okay, no problem, Susan. I'm not going to say anything. But at some point I say, hey, Susan has, things that I can help her with. She's willing to share information with us. Maybe I should pitch her and try to recruit her, right? So one day we're at a restaurant or something, and I say, Susan, you might have figured out by now that I have duties other than my political reporting duties, and we could sure use help from, a person like yourself, and I pitch you, right? And I recruit you as a spy, and now my responsibility is to protect you. So I've got to meet you. So that's where all these things like safe houses come into play. I mean, everybody's heard about a safe house. Well, what's a safe house? Well, you gotta have places to meet your secret agents. You can't just go and hang out in public now anymore and start, you give me classified information that I can take photographs of stuff. You can't do that in a restaurant. So you got to have a safe house. And then you've got to be able to make sure that when I come to meet you and you come to meet me, that we're not followed, right? So we practice surveillance detection routes and things like that, so that if I'm being followed, I don't want to lead your security services or the Soviet security services or the Chinese or anybody else who might be following me to you. Right. So that's where you have to get all clandestine. That's where you use phones and code words, and, somebody, calls you and asks for Mr. Todorovich, and you say, I'm sorry, it's a wrong number, but that means something to you. Right. And then there are the occasions when, like, if you're in really hostile environments like China or the Soviet Union, where you can't meet face to face, you have what you probably heard of as dead drops. Right, a dead drop and signals and things like that. Well, a dead drop is like anything. Like maybe this can right here could be a dead drop. I'm going to have secret information in this can, and I'm going to put it at a pre-selected location that you know about, where I can be under surveillance, make a few turns, make the final turn, boom, I put the package down in a place that nobody's going to see it. I continue on. Surveillance comes around the corner. They see me. I'm still walking. Okay, great. We've got them, but they don't know about that package. And then I go somewhere, and the easiest way to describe a signal is like a chalk mark on a wall. I turn another corner, and I take a piece of chalk and I mark the wall very quickly. And a day later, you come from another direction entirely in your normal way of coming to work or whatever, and to look at that wall. And if you look at that wall and you see that there's a chalk mark, then you know that there's a package waiting for you, so you'll go and retrieve that package when you can and if it's secure. That gets into the real clandestine stuff like that. But see the difference between CIA and the FBI? I mean, I don't have a badge. I can't go to anybody overseas and a CIA badge and say, you got to talk to me. No, I'll get arrested and thrown in jail.
It's interesting that you bring up that in your example, let's just say it's somebody who needs money or is financially in trouble. And that's certainly, I imagine, one of the biggest indicators of someone who'd be willing to help because they're desperate for their situation.
Sure.
This is such an important thing, I think, in our own United States government, of why if you're a politician with debts or heavily involved in the stock market or anything like that, I think that's a big, huge red flag of a easily compromised individual.
Yeah. And the Chinese, especially, the Chinese are all over us. I mean, the Chinese are the best in the world at this sort of thing. They've been stealing our data for decades, not just the last couple of years. They've been stealing it for decades. And in 2015, last year it was reported in 2015, started in like 2013 and went on. But there's a place called the Office of Personnel Management, OPM. And guys like me, when you become a CIA officer or any intelligence officer or an FBI agent for that matter, you have to fill out forms that are like this thick. Everybody's got to fill them out, and they're a security questionnaire, and it's all about who you are, what you are, where you live, who your neighbors were, where your banks are, all that kind of stuff. And then they can do the background investigation on you, and then they can see if what you told them turns out to be true, or that kind of deal. So everybody had to do that. All those forms were held by OPM, and the Chinese back in between 2013 and 2015 stole 22 million of those files. 22 million, not just one or two, or they snuck Brian Fairchild's file out. They just grabbed them. We found out about it in a belated way. I mean, it wasn't like we were so sharp. We were like, hey, the Chinese are stealing our stuff. We found out afterwards. The OPM wrote me an actual letter saying, hey, Mr. Fairchild, you're one of those guys. They stole your stuff. And so for the next 10 years, if you have any problems, like all of a sudden your bank account's cleaned out or anything, contact us and we'll reimburse you. That's what they told me. But the point is that they've got information on me, my family, my son, my daughter. Let's say they get into a security situation, they know so much about us that they can already build pitches or maybe try to do a cold pitch, or maybe try to do a coercive pitch based on some kind of a vulnerability. I mean, you see it in the movies all the time, people coercing other people to do this stuff. And it is like that in counter-terrorism operations, but not in espionage operations like this. Because if you force somebody to do something against their will, sooner or later, they're going to screw you. They're going to say, I'm going to get you back, man. You're bullying me. You're forcing me. I don't want to be doing this. You're putting my life in danger. And I've got to do it right now because you're holding this thing over my head. But I'm going to get you. Sooner or later, they'll get you. So it's not a good policy to coerce people to become spies. But yeah, so that's the difference between like law enforcement, federal law enforcement like FBI, and spy agencies.
I know that China is certainly a big threat. Did the Cold War ever end, in your opinion, with Russia? It feels to me like it's still pretty rocking and rolling.
Yeah, the Cold War never ended for them. The Cold War ended for us. And it was a big deal when it ended for us. because we're just not, to tell you the truth, Susan, and I was an excellent CIA officer. I came with a great pedigree, and I did a lot of cool things, but we're not really very good at this stuff. America as an institution, the United States of America, isn't very good at this stuff. I mean, when you think of all the times where we had the ultimate advantage after World War II, Europe is decimated. We have the atomic bomb. Nobody else has it. We couldn't figure out how to keep that position. Right. And so the Soviets built the bomb, and then the Chinese built the bomb, and the Israelis built the bomb. And we just couldn't do anything. And North Korea is a perfect example. For my entire life, the U.S. policy for North Korea was to prevent it from becoming an atomic power, and it is. and our official line is still not to allow it to become a nuclearized,
sure,
country, but it's already there, because we didn't exert our influence or do anything to prevent that. We just watched.
Right. If uranium suddenly disappears, these places aren't even guarded that well, unfortunately, especially in places like Russia. So it's not a surprise when chunks of things go missing.
Right. The countries themselves have their own programs. How long have you heard the United States say, we're not going to allow Iran to become a nuclear power? Iran is a nuclear power today.
Yeah. But don't you feel like it's only a matter of time for these things to happen?
Yeah. And so my point is that we're just not very good at this stuff. And so, we did great operations, and special operations guys do fantastic operations, and they're the best special operators in the world. But as a nation, we don't know how, once we have attained power, to maintain power and keep power and exert influence and stuff. So here's what actually happened. We beat the Soviets in the Cold War, right? But a lot of it happened to be because the Soviet economy was terrible. We kept putting pressure on them. We did the Star Wars program. They couldn't keep up with us. Their people were disenfranchised, and they rebelled themselves. And then they went to Afghanistan like we did. Screwed that whole thing up, kind of like we did. Their own people rebelled against them, and finally they fell. And when they fell in 1991, there was a guy in Congress by the name of Daniel Patrick Moynihan. And old Daniel Patrick Moynihan was in the front pages of the paper every day, a flamboyant guy, a brilliant congressman, and all this sort of thing. And after the Soviet Union fell, he came up to James Woolsey, who was then the director of CIA, and he said, "James, you guys did a great job. You beat the Soviets. Way to go. You won the Cold War. But do we even need a CIA anymore? Why do we even need you guys? Right? This is how we handle things, right?" But it wasn't just Daniel Patrick Moynihan. It was all the politicians, all the presidents. They actually coined the phrase, "There was an end to history." We had beaten the Soviet Union. What more can you expect? We are the leading country of the world. Europe was in tatters, and we rebuilt Europe in the Marshall Plan and everything. We are the guys that there's never going to be any guys that are going to ever contest us again. There's an end to history. Why do we even need a CIA? So from 1991 to 2001, CIA was like a rudderless ocean-going vessel. Right? It had no primary mission, because we were created basically to go after the Soviet Union. That was a reason for the creation of the CIA in 1947. And so for 10 years, the poor CIA, is running around. I mean, James Woolsey joked there was a time, you might have seen it in a newsreel or something in the past, but a Cessna aircraft accidentally crashed into the front lawn of the White House. And that was oh my God, that was a big deal. Well, Jim Woolsey would joke about that and say, that was me trying to get in to see Clinton, because Clinton didn't even want to see him. Clinton only saw his CIA director like 3 times during Jim Woolsey's tenure.
Meanwhile, the internet is getting stronger, and the global powers are getting more connected.
Yeah.
And it's a lawless land without any safeguards.
Absolutely. And like you said before, China and Russia never stopped being in the Cold War. And they looked at us taking this hiatus, like, oh, great, you guys do your thing, and we're going to build up capabilities that specifically target your vulnerabilities. And that's what they did for 10 years, right? Rudderless. The guy, George Tenet, who was director in 2001 at the 9/11 attacks by Al Qaeda, well, that 10 years later, from 1991 to 2001, September 11th, CIA was a rudderless boat ship, and all of a sudden they got their new primary mission, and it was terrorism, counterterrorism, because Al Qaeda attacked us. Now, George Tenet said that at that time they were beside themselves because CIA was basically in Chapter 11 bankruptcy. I mean, the farm was in disrepair. The farm is a place that is our training facility. The farm was in disrepair. We had closed stations and bases. They forced me and my brothers out. I was in Tokyo in 1995. It came time for me to choose my next assignment. And I said, well, send me anywhere. I don't care. Just send me anywhere. I like this. And they said, no, come back to headquarters. And Susan, nobody ever, if you're a CIA officer, and your job is to recruit foreign spies, you can't do that from the hallways and corridors of headquarters, right? So you never wanted to come back to headquarters. You'd do anything to stay overseas. That's what you did. That's who you are, So I wrote and said, I don't want to come back to headquarters. Send me, where does no one else want to go? Find a place that nobody else wants to go and send me. I'll go. And they said, come back to headquarters. And I said, well, look, okay, if you don't want to send me to any place nobody else wants to go and nobody's going, well, then send me to the farm and I'll teach other guys how to be a case officer. They said, no, I'll come back to headquarters. And then they finally came back and said, look, here's the deal. We don't really want you guys anymore. Why don't you take early retirement? We'll give you an early out bonus. We'll give you lots of money. And you can take your retirement and the early out bonus that we're going to give you, and you have a lot of money, and you can start a whole new career. Why don't you guys do that? Because they basically didn't want us anymore, right? They said there was an end to history. Do we even need you guys? No. They'd rather spend the peace dividend, is what they called it, the peace dividend in their own constituencies and for their own personal purposes. And so that's what they did. So for 10 years, the CIA was rudderless. Then in 2001, they get the new mission, and it's counterterrorism. And for 20 years thereafter, they do nothing but counterterrorism. But it's not even strategic counterterrorism. See, that's the thing. The CIA was the premier strategic intelligence agency, which meant the big picture. Who are our enemies? Who are our enemies' allies? Why are they the allies of our enemies? What kind of military capability do they have? What are their foreign policies? Why are they going to Latin America? Why are they going to Africa? What are the answers to these questions so our policymakers can make good policy regarding those things? That's what spies do. When they focused on, so that's strategic intelligence. But when we got involved in counterterrorism, people like to say it was strategic counterterrorism, but it wasn't. The reason they say that is because we were doing counterterrorism all over the world. So if you're doing it all over the world, well, it must be strategic, but that's not true. We didn't strategically, you would have gone after the leadership and the ideology and the places that supported the ideology and the madrasas that taught the ideology. And you would do that and try to stem the ideology, nip it in the bud, and then at the same time, go after the soldiers and the mid-level guys, try to get them out of the picture. And maybe you have a chance of stopping Islamist terrorism against the rest of the world.
But how do you fight? I get how you fight people, but how do you fight their ideas or the ideology?
Yeah, see, that's the thing. I mean, it's hard to kill an idea, right? And you can't. But what you can do is you can put a kibosh on it. If you start dealing with Middle Eastern countries and you start saying, the guys in your country are the guys that attacked us, and we want to do business with you country to country, and we want to have military contracts and all that kind of stuff, but we can't do it if you're supporting the ideology that creates the people that attack us. So you deal with them on a national level, like the Saudis, for instance, right? And you say, put the kibosh on these radicals, because not everybody in Saudi Arabia is radical. So you put the kibosh on the guys that are radical, and you make it harder for them to spread the ideology, harder for them to operate according to the ideology, and so forth and so on. But we didn't do that. We went very narrow. We said, we're going to go after these leaders of Al-Qaeda, and we're going to capture or kill them. And that's what we did for 20 years. The only thing we did for 20 years. It hasn't stopped Al-Qaeda. It hasn't stopped the Islamic State. Hasn't stopped any of that stuff. Well, we got rid of a lot of people. And a lot of those people, you can't even say were legitimate targets because they were only military-aged males from areas that had the ideology. And maybe they were hanging out with guys that had a reputation of being radicals. So therefore, they're all radicals. So we had to get rid of all of them. And so that's what we were doing in Afghanistan and Iraq and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't even a strategic approach. But while we were not doing the strategic approach and we were just doing basically tactical counterterrorism operations against individuals and cells, we let the rest of the world grow up around us. And Russia grew up around us and became a power again, and China became the ascendant power, much more dangerous and powerful than anything we ever faced during the Soviet Union, Cold War times. And now China is basically running the world. But here's what we allowed them to do in the 20 years that we weren't watching. China has the largest armed services in the world, the largest navy in the world, the largest shipbuilding in the world, the largest fisheries in the world, the largest Coast Guard in the world, and the largest maritime militia in the world. And that's very important because when you're talking about a situation like Taiwan, any conflict we get involved with in China is going to be a naval conflict. And they've got the largest navy. And of course, they've got missiles coming out of the woodwork, including a missile called a hypersonic missile. We have no hypersonic missiles, and hypersonic missiles we have no defense against. And that's not Brian Fairchild telling you this, Susan. That's Milley, who was just formerly the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said China has this capability, hypersonic missiles, that we have no defense against. A regular ballistic missile, like during the Cold War, where we're going to blow each other, countries off the map, they take off and they go basically into space, but there's a trajectory, right? They take off and they go like this, and then they start arcing, and they're going to come down on their targets. And because of that arc, and because you can see, we have sensors that can see them firing their ballistic missiles, we can track where the target is. And if you have an anti-ballistic missile capability, as that missile is going into its arc, you can shoot it down. But a hypersonic missile can be launched from a submarine, can be launched from an aircraft, can be sent into space. But once it comes back down, it doesn't go and boom. It goes
Oh, it's wiggler. It's a serpentine.
And it goes around your air defenses. And not only that, but it's doing it at like maybe 10 times the speed of sound. So at 10 times the speed of sound, our air defenses can't even track it, doesn't even see it. It goes by, right? And your air defense capability didn't go, hey, we got a threat. No, they didn't even see the threat because the thing is, going at hypersonic speeds. And so we can't stop them. And that also means that from the time it fires to the time it hits us is really a shortened length of time. So when you're talking about Taiwan and China, the Chinese have missiles up and down the coast. I mean, there's no way we can get within 1,000 miles of China without them seeing us and without them being able to fire their missiles, not just hypersonic missiles, but other missiles included. But the Chinese recently did studies saying if we did 3 salvos of, I think, 6 hypersonic missiles each salvo, we could wipe out all of your aircraft carriers. See, now that's one of the reasons that when you saw China encircling Taiwan like 5 times now, and basically putting a blockade in place, that the United States forces stood way back. We watched, but we never got involved. We didn't do what we're doing in the Red Sea now, right? We do that in the Red Sea now because Iran, they've got some missiles and they're giving their missiles to the proxies, and the proxies are shooting at them, but they don't. And Iran has a hypersonic missile, but they don't have so many of them that we can't respond to them and wipe them out, but China does.
China wants Taiwan, obviously, but do you think that China would be so bold as to attack the country of the United States of America? But that mutually assured destruction sounding bell seems to pop in my head, thinking, well, they got to be crazy to do that.
Yeah, but see, all those missiles aren't nuclear missiles. They're just normal missiles. They're just normal kinetic missiles. Now, the hypersonic missile can be both. It can have a nuclear warhead or a conventional warhead. Let's just take the situation in Taiwan. We're scared to death of getting too close to China because of their missile capability, and they've got submarine capability, and they've got everything that we've got, and they've got it pretty much as well as we do. A lot of people will say, "Oh, yeah, but the U.S. technology is better." Well, most experts I know say we may have a couple of destroyers that have a little better radar than the 055 does, for China. But it's so narrow that it really doesn't matter. And they have so many of them, and we have so few. There's a quality in quantity all of its own. So the same thing with submarine hunters and all that kind of stuff. So here's the deal. If China attacks Taiwan, and it doesn't even attack Taiwan and blow it up with missiles and try to, storm the beaches like D-Day, if it puts a blockade around it, what can the United States do? Well, unless we're willing to go to war and have imagine the United States of America having its premier aircraft carrier strike group sunk. What would that do to the United States of America and to our reputation? What allies of ours would say, let us rush to your aid, given the fact that we don't have anything close to what you have, the United States, and you just got yourself wiped out. See, so you start seeing it's not like all of a sudden, Article 5 of NATO takes effect and everybody goes to world war, because they can go, well, they didn't really attack it with nuclear missiles and they basically have the upper hand on all of us and we need their trade. So I think I'm going to sit this one out.
And it's tricky too, right? Because we can't really not really sanction China because we owe them A, a lot of money, B, they run pretty much our entire electronics industry.
Well, and it works both ways. See, that's another thing that the United States let happen during the hiatus of not having a strategic spy agency, is that China and the Chinese and American economy became so entangled that we can't unentangle ourselves. But what we can do is we can look at specific technologies that we can try to deprive them of. And so we've initiated sanctions against China and against everybody, right? The sanctions didn't stop Russia.
I mean, I don't think they really work that well.
Yeah. I mean, they punish people and they hurt, but they figure out ways around them. So sanctions isn't going to work. So, unless you have hard military power and an enemy knows that they're going to pay a dear price if they take you on, there's no deterrence. And one of the things you'll find bandied about, Washington, D.C. these days is that the United States no longer has a deterrent. And that's why China's running roughshod over everybody. That's why it's forcing the Philippines out of the Philippine waters. And we have a treaty with the Philippines, a 1951 treaty, and we haven't done anything about it. And the treaty, see, that's another thing, is that there's legalese, right? The treaty calls for the United States to defend Philippines if they're fired upon. But when the Chinese are using water cannons and ramming ships instead of firing upon them, the treaty really doesn't have to be enacted. And what politician is going to run into a world war if the treaty hasn't even really been officially broken?
Yeah. And
so we got Biden, who basically has ceded the South China Sea and the area around Taiwan to China. Right now, we look at all the stuff we've done in the Red Sea, all the naval assets we have, Marine expeditionary groups, all that sort of thing. It's all over the place in the Red Sea and shooting down Houthi missiles and all that sort of thing. But there's nothing like that around Taiwan. And there's the reason. And the reason is what I've just been explaining to you.
Yeah.
And we've run war games, right? Not just CIA, I mean the Department of Defense and civilian think tanks like CSIS, considered to be the best think tank in the world, has run these war games. And what they've come out with is, after running like 64 war games and all different kinds of possibilities, shapes and sizes and capabilities and things. And they said, well, the best we can say is we might actually stop China from physically, overwhelming the geography of Taiwan, but at such a price that we will be screwed for the rest of our lives. I mean, so what does that mean? Well, it means they'll sink at least 2 aircraft carriers, 20 to 30 of our destroyers, all the men on board, submarine, they'll destroy some of our submarine. Now we'll get our licks in and we'll give them, hell too, but they've got the biggest, strategic shipbuilding capability that can repair and create new ships at a rate that we can't even start to come close to. So even if they take it in the shorts, they can rebuild their navy faster than we can. And there's another thing that people don't understand either. China is now the leader of what I wrote a paper. I've written a book, but that book is fiction. But I write analyses too. And over a year ago in October, I wrote a paper called The New Axis of Evil, the military bloc, the anti-American military bloc led by China. And that's the facts on the ground. So China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea comprise this thing called the New Axis of Evil. Now you can call it whatever you want. You can say it's a military alliance or military bloc or whatever. It doesn't matter if they have formal designations and stamps on papers. They are cooperating in a concerted way to make the United States and our allies distribute our power all over the place where we can't focus on any one of them. North Korea sounds off. We send a carrier strike group up there. Oh, we got to do something. The things go on. All of a sudden, the New Axis of Evil says to Iran, hey, why don't you do something and attack Israel? Because if you attack Israel, the United States is going to rush to your aid. And if they rush to your aid, we can tie them down and tie their missiles down, tie their subs down, tie their carriers down, and we'll tie them down there. And in North Korea, around North Korea. And of course, we got Taiwan taken care of. And every day they're trying to figure out how to get weapons to Ukraine, except now their own Congress doesn't want to support Ukraine anymore, which is exactly what we want as the New Axis of Evil.
I feel like there's this huge campaign that has been incredibly successful in the United States to manipulate the people online. And
Putin,
that to me is bonkers. All these people don't seem to really understand what is happening here. They've been completely manipulated, and I don't know how to get out of that.
Well, I mean, there's no easy answer, and you're absolutely right. And one of the sorry things about our state right now, our state of being, our national, our national state of being, is that we have so much polarization in the United States that we've in effect negated the word united in the United States of America. Now, you can call us the dysfunctional states of America. You can call us the polarized states of America. You can call us the, whatever you want, but we're not the United States of America anymore. And I believe that Americans would be hard pressed to define what an American is anymore. And I'm not a politician. I'm not a Biden guy. I'm not a Trump guy. I'm an intelligence officer. I just got to tell you the way it is from an intelligence officer's point of view. And you've got the Putin wing of the Republican Party, a fairly few number of congressmen that are preventing any kind of aid to get to Ukraine. And when that happens, because we're on record, the president is on record saying, we will be there for you through thick and thin forever until you're done. And now we're not. And so you look at what do our Asian allies, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, when they're looking at us and saying, can we count on the United States of America to protect us? You think China worries about us in Taiwan? They say, even if we get into the thick of it with the United States of America in Taiwan, in another 2 years, they'll be tired of it and they'll say, well, we don't want to do this anymore. It's too expensive. We don't want to do it.
Not only that, it's not hard to manipulate the American people into whatever these axis, as you call it, the new axis of evil powers want. I mean, I don't think folks really understand how this computer that they're staring at, or this phone that they're staring at, is working overtime to help our quote unquote enemies. Now, I'm a humanist, and I want a world where everyone gets along.
Sure.
And I have friends from all walks of life, all colors of the rainbow, an entire political spectrum. For me, like you, this is not political. This is
common sense.
I mean, it feels like common sense, but then I feel like, am I the one taking crazy pills?
Survivability, sustainability. Yeah. But see, it's so ingrained now. This is a generational issue. The United States is in really bad shape now. The Heritage Foundation. You know who the Heritage Foundation is?
I do.
Well, the Heritage Foundation for like the last 10 years has been appraising our military capabilities. Last year and this year, they basically come out and said the United States military is overall rated as weak. The Navy is rated as very weak, and the Air Force very weak. And those are the two services that we would need to go against China in any situation, whether it's in the Philippines, Taiwan, or whatever, because it's a naval air battle. And we don't have the pilots, we don't have the planes, and blah, 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 right? Let's say everybody in politics and in the administration agrees with me, Brian Fairchild, former CIA officer, right now. And they say, absolutely, I believe that everything that guy says is true, and we're going to change it right now. You can't just snap your fingers and have a shipbuilding capability. You can't snap your fingers and stop the fact that no young Americans want to join the service anymore. The services can't meet their quotas, their recruiting quota. They haven't met them for 2 years, 25,000 short. 25,000 less weapons that are on the battlefield because you don't have the people to have those weapons.
Right, and the military tends to prey on the poor, right, the economically disenfranchised,
and former military legacy families and so forth.
But the greater part of the people that die in wars are the people whose families have to send these kids off.
Sure, yeah. And so, can you imagine the United States that now, given the polarization in the United States, let's say they initiate the draft tomorrow. Even if you're drafted, how many kids do you think are going to go to the military? And how many are just going to say, no, I'm not going? So anyway, my point being, you can't just snap your fingers and turn this around. You can't all of a sudden have a world-class naval capability anymore and put that around Taiwan, because we're only, and this might be a shock to you, but as the military says, the chief of naval operations say, we can only build 1.5 destroyers and 1.5 submarines a year. A year. In China, they have like 13 shipbuilding shipyards. One of those shipyards has more capability than the entire United States. At one time, they build 6 destroyers simultaneously, and we can only build 1.5 a year. And we don't have the shipyards. We don't have the expertise and capability anymore. We let our defense industrial base slide away. So it's a generational problem. And you got to have leaders that want to work together with the other side. I mean, when I was growing up, there's always Democrats and Republicans, but the one thing that we all basically agreed on across the aisle was defense, and the defense of the United States of America against the bad guys. And now we don't even have that. So we're kind of in a world of hurt. And for what it's worth, I mean, that's my 2 cents worth.
As somebody that has been trained to see operatives, when you look at something like the American political system as it is right now, do your hackles go up? And do you think in some cases that we have been infiltrated?
There's no doubt we've been infiltrated. In fact, I mean, to your point, just today, just before I got on with you, I was reading about, a chief petty officer in the U.S. Navy assigned to Japan, who's been selling secrets to a foreign power. I mean, that happens all the time. Espionage happens all the time. Every agency in the United States has been penetrated. I mean, it's a matter of historical record. The CIA in particular, in 2010, the Chinese wrapped up the entire CIA network in China. Killed several dozen people, one publicly in a courtyard to show the rest of the people don't mess with the United States or this is what's going to happen to you. They wiped out the entire CIA network. And then just a year and a half ago, CIA came out and sent a worldwide message to all stations and bases worldwide saying that our operations have been compromised. People have been arrested, people have been killed, people have been turned against us. What the heck are you guys doing? I mean, the CIA talking to its own officers saying, what are you doing? We think you're just not paying attention, or you don't understand the capabilities of foreign intelligence services, or you're not spending enough time on counterintelligence. You don't even know if these people have secrets. You're just recruiting people willy-nilly, and they're all getting wrapped up. And what the hell are you doing? And so that's the capability of the espionage situation right there. So to your question, are we being penetrated? Well, yeah. Yeah, the CIA says we're being penetrated. FBI says we're being penetrated. And then that's not even talking about probably the major threat, which is a cyber threat. And the fact that the Chinese have showed us on time and time again, and the FBI has reported time and time again, that they are specifically targeting against our infrastructure, and especially infrastructure like oil and water and electricity. And they're doing it in Guam too. Now, Guam's one of the key things. We can't fight any kind of a war around Taiwan or the South China Sea without basing people in Guam and Okinawa. So my estimation would be that China is not going to attack the continental United States with missiles and so such and so forth, but they will attack U.S. bases, U.S. owned. Guam is a U.S. property. It's not a foreign property. Now, Okinawa, we borrow bases and stuff, but Guam is our territory. They will attack Guam, and they will attack Okinawa, and they will attack places in the Philippines, and they will attack Taiwan, and they will threaten to attack any Asian power that comes to our aid. And all those Asian powers need their trade. So Biden has been doing his best to build up. Since he's not going to do military hard power, he's been doing his best to put together things that take years and years, maybe decades, to actually make efficient, and that's allies and alliances. So one of the things that he's been doing is really focused on, South Korea and Japan as coming to our aid. That's great, except that, the South Korean and Japanese capabilities are, not the best capabilities, but even more so, the Japanese population recently in a poll said that they're not willing to go to war against China about Taiwan. So see, if you're building alliances, that's great. If your alliances are like the alliances during World War II, and we're all going on the beach in D-Day, and the Australians and the Americans and the Brits and everybody were going against the enemy, and we're all fighting equally, that's great. But we're putting together alliances that are not even going to be secure for the next 20 or 30 years with people who don't want to go and fight for us because of our national interests. They want to protect their own national interests. In the Red Sea, we put together a task force now, right? We've invited all these nations to come to. Well, the Australians sent like 15 guys, no naval assets or anything, 15 guys to go to headquarters and coordinate. And other powers like Italy and Germany said, well, we don't want to be officially part of your task force. So your alliances aren't any good unless they're willing to be shoulder to shoulder to you, fighting against the enemy that you've agreed on. And we don't have that. So, you can talk about it all you want, and Biden can go and say, well, look at what I've done. And, we've never had a stronger position, and we've got alliances in Japan and South Korea. But when you really look at it, those alliances aren't worth spit unless those people are willing to go to war with China over Taiwan and U.S. national interests. And they're not. There's the intelligence officer's assessment. I think that war is coming, or some kind of a military action is coming in the South China Sea and against China.
I might be a pessimist, but I think war is here. I think we've been fighting a war for a while now. Whether or not people seem to want to agree with that, I don't know. But what do I know? But that's what it seems like to me.
Oh, I would agree with your point. It's even worse. I mean, because what has to happen if we were to go to war? Let's say China moves against Taiwan. Well, a huge question in my intelligence officer's brain is, would Biden commit to that? Now Biden has gone overboard, bent over backwards, telling the Chinese, We don't want confrontation. We don't want a new Cold War. We don't want to have any problems with you. And the few times he said we would put troops on Taiwan, his own people have walked that back now. So the question is, if they move on Taiwan, would the United States even react? Would Biden commit forces and naval forces, knowing that he's going to get into a war, ships are going to be sunk, American soldiers are going to be dead? Where's that going to take him? Would he even commit? So if the Chinese estimate that he's not even going to commit, or not in any meaningful way, then they're not deterred. And the big thing, like I said, around Washington, D.C. these days is that the United States deterrence isn't working.
Right.
It's not working against the proxy forces that Iran has. No matter how many sorties we take out of our big, cool U.S. aircraft carriers with our great planes and pilots and stuff, it's not stopping them. They keep sinking ships. They keep firing missiles at us. So if we can't even deter the Iranian proxies, do you think China's worried about us deterring them? And there's a deal. I mean, it's all pretty straightforward. I mean, you either have hard power and willing to use it, which deters your enemy, or you don't. And right now we're kind of in a world of hurt. We don't have it.
Yeah. Dude, when you see things like in the news today, the AT&T towers shut down cell service to all those people, does your instinct immediately go to, shit's hitting the fan?
Yeah, no, I think what is happening with all these cyber attacks is one of the targeting against our infrastructure. We eventually found. I think we found it through some civilian organizations that were doing analysis of the systems. So we know that they're targeting our infrastructure. But I think many of their attacks, are just to send us a message. Like when they did the attacks against Guam, there's only one way to take that. I mean, it wasn't an attack. They were attacks that were known, that the Chinese knew we were going to discover. And they wanted us to discover them because they want us to know, if you guys go against us, this is what we're going to do. We've got the capability. You see, we've got the capability. Do you really want to go against us? Right? That deters us. Right? And that deters Biden or any president. It's like, the president says to his national security team, well, if the shit hits the fan, how are we going to, how is it going to be for us? Those guys have to look at him and say, well, sir, I mean, the Chinese have already proven to us that they can shut down our infrastructure in Guam. They've got the hypersonic missiles. They'll take out our runways, if nothing else, and our ports, and we won't be able to use those places to marshal forces or resources. It's going to be kind of bad for us. And, we can move stuff from Australia, but, they can see us coming from 1,000 miles away, and they got these hypersonic missiles. And, that's going to be tough for us. Although, we can dodge and move around and move our forces. But see, China's got all their array of satellites watching our aircraft carriers as they move. And they know when we pull into port in Japan, and we say, here we are in Japan, or here we are in South Korea with our submarines and our aircraft carriers, they go, great, good starting point. Start from there and track these guys wherever they go.
Yeah. Well, that's when the balloons that came in, the Chinese air balloons, to me, everyone freaking out about that, the regular American public freaking out about that. And I thought, you're literally holding a phone that they have been tracking since day one. If you think that little balloon is getting more intel than the phone in your hand that is being held by bazillions of Americans, you're insane.
Well, the scary thing is that, I mean, this phone, this is the biggest vulnerability we have, as individuals. But worse than that, I mean, like I've mentioned before, and everything I say, I hope that your audience, checks me and fact checks me and stuff, because they'll see that I'm not making this stuff up. It's all true. If you look at the National Counterintelligence Center, the National Counterintelligence Center, which puts out public warnings and things of the United States government, has stated repeatedly that the Chinese have probably obtained DNA information on practically every American citizen. Now, what does that do? Well, on one hand, it's a big deal for them because, in using artificial intelligence, which I know that you're really interested in, the Chinese excel at that. Artificial intelligence It depends on the size of your language models, and how much you can do, how much research you can do, how much progress you can make, and so forth and so on. Now, China has already, weaponized every bit of information within China, right? I mean, they've got everybody's DNA. They got everybody on facial recognition and all that sort of thing. Well, if they get everybody's DNA from the United States, well, they can put that into their language model so that they get better and their military weapons get better and so forth and so on. DNA and CRISPR technology. Do you know CRISPR? CRISPR technology is this genetic cutting and pasting.
Sure. Yeah.
So CRISPR, I mean, and it's a solid, great, wonderful technology. And Dudna, the lady who developed this, I mean, she's solving and curing diseases, genetic diseases. Also, if you can go and you can cure somebody's sickle cell anemia, well, if I want to, go after Brian Fairchild, and I've got his DNA, and I look at his DNA, and they can do your whole genome, right, just from the DNA. Right. So your whole genome, and they find out that I've got, some kind of a syndrome that's depressed and not active at this particular point in time. And they decide to kill me with a genetic weapon. They can create the genetic weapon, use a flu as the vector, as the way to get that to me. And it's only going to kill me. And the Chinese are known and have stated in their own documentation that they're working on ethnic weapons.
Yeah, it's the assassin warfare.
Oh, yeah. And you think about what they're doing against their own Uyghur population, where they've got millions of people, basically in concentration camps. They have, forced sterilization, forced abortions, DNA taken from everybody, cameras everywhere, everything on your phone is taken. And it's an ethnic group that the Chinese would just like to go away. And then you hear the Chinese military defense university saying, we're looking at the capability of creating ethnic weapons, genetic ethnic weapons. That's something to worry about. So, I mean, yeah, so the phone is terrible, and that's why whenever somebody like me goes into a SCIF, a secure area where you're not allowed to go in unless you put your phone somewhere outside and go in, because everybody knows this phone can be tracked. Even if the phone's turned off, it can be made into a microphone. And we've been doing that. I mean, the agency has been doing that for decades. So I mean, that's like nothing new.
That's why I get so frustrated when people don't really understand what has been happening, as you say, for decades, and that they themselves are holding the device, which has compromised so much information.
Probably 3 times a day, they agree and permit that device to, take more of their information because they want to shop from a certain place, and it asks them, can I use your data? And I want to buy this thing, so they say, I agree.
Right. Consumerism will be our downfall for sure.
And the Chinese have gone to all those information sellers and bought up all that information about us. It's terrible. And if you just talk about cover as an intelligence officer, why do you have to have cover? What is cover? Well, cover is if I go abroad and you put me as an official in the American embassy. Well, everybody knows that I'm an official American, whether I'm CIA or not. I'm an intelligence officer of some kind, right? I'm an enemy. If you're China, I'm an official American official. I'm an enemy. But worse yet, if I was to go to the Tokyo embassy and say, I'm CIA, I'm a spy. Well, then I try to meet you, right? And I meet you at a restaurant, and we start having talks. Well, everybody knows that I'm CIA and I'm meeting you, right? So one day they come to you and they knock on your door, your own security service, and your own security service says, "Hey, Susan, you know this guy Brian Fairchild, right?" "Oh yeah, he's a nice man. He's a diplomat in the United States government." And they say to you, "Well, he's a spy, right?" Now, right away, you're on the spot. You've got your national security service coming into your house and saying, "Why are you dealing with an American spy?" Right? And then so you get all nervous and you go, "Oh, I'm going to cut off relationships. I'm not going to ever see him again." And they say, no, Susan, we want you to see him. And at some point, he's going to pitch you to become a spy, and we want you to accept. And we're going to give you the information that he's asking you to provide to the CIA. And his policymakers are going to be making policy, wrong policy, on fallacious intelligence that you're going to provide him. And if you can do that for a lifetime, that's what we want you to do. So that's why you have to have cover. And you can't have cover anymore. CIA can't have the cover anymore by putting people in official cover positions out of embassies. And if you talk about just the satellite capabilities that we were just talking about, and you talk about CIA headquarters and all the information that they've soaked up and all those license plate numbers, how can you say if anybody goes into CIA headquarters that they have cover? Because all the Chinese have to do is put that in the system. And then when you come overseas, they say, well, let's do a trace on this Fairchild guy. Oh, yeah, he's a CIA officer. Here's his license plate number. He's been going in the CIA for years. Those are things that people don't think about. But that's what the real situation is, and it's bad.
If it weren't so terrifying, it would be hysterically funny, because it's like some insane movie that if you wrote this script and turned it in, they would say, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, it can't be for
it's so over the top.
This is really comedy, but it's not even comedy we can believe. Yeah, but it's true. Yeah. It's true. I got another technology that I've got to tell you about because it's just amazing. Have you ever heard of WAMI, wide area motion imagery? Okay, well, WAMI, we developed, not the CIA, but the US government developed WAMI technology and used it in Afghanistan. I was in Afghanistan for a year and a half. Forces used it in Afghanistan and back in 2011. And it's an amazing technology because it's only about a size like this. You can put it in a Cessna aircraft, you can put it in a balloon, you can put it in a dirigible, you can put it in a drone. But what it does is it circles the city, it's all digital, and it videos the city in a big cone, right? So as it goes around the city, that cone is constantly looking at the city so that it records all movement in the city, all movement, right? So if you come out on your stoop to get the paper, it's got you. And then they can go back and they can do a search back into time for you if they decide you're a target or that you're a threat. And they can go back for as long as they've got it because it's digital. And as much as they've got saved, they can find out where you went, how you got there, what vehicle you used, what people you met, where they went, where they live, all this sort of thing. So imagine now you're Brian Fairchild and you go to the American Embassy in Tokyo and WAMI is circling above. And I come out of the American Embassy and I'm undercover. I tell people I'm a political officer, but nobody's fooled by that. So they got me. As soon as I come out of the door, they got me. And I say, okay, I'm going to be kind of spooky here and I'm going to do surveillance detection routes and I'm going to take a bus from here to there and then I'm going to take a taxi from there to there and then I'm going to take the tube from there to there and I'm going to walk around these neighborhoods and I'm finally going to go to the safe house. They got you, right? So WAMI technology completely obsolete, makes CIA technology, CIA tradecraft obsolescent. So what you've got to do now, and what I've been pushing CIA to do, and why they probably don't like me very much, like I was saying before, and the whole book that I wrote, the fictional book, is about this and about coming up with cover that's actually viable. And it's the kind of cover where it's like you're recruited not at CIA headquarters or sending in applications online, but you're recruited by a sports talent scout. Say I'm living overseas and I'm a businessman. I'm in Zambia and I'm doing business. I'm selling Montana beef to Zambians, and I've been there for 10 years. I'm married to a Zambian woman. I have some of the language, and I've got networks of my own in government as well as in commercial spaces. I know tribal leaders and all this sort of thing. I mean, I'm a great spy, right? If I was a spy. But I'm not. I'm just a commercial guy. But if CIA sends out a talent scout and looks at different, populations, American business populations, and goes, "Hey, this guy's Fairchild. Hey, he was in the 19th Special Forces group, and he's a heck of a businessman, and he's working in a business in an area that makes grown men cry and being successful about it. How about we wait till he comes home and we'll approach him and see if he wants to be a spy for us?" And if that happens, then whether I'm recorded by Whammy or not doesn't matter, because I'm never going in and out of the U.S. Embassy. I've never known as anything to do with any U.S. government institution. They already know me and have done searches on me for years, saying, "Oh yeah, Fairchild's that guy who sells Montana beef. He's not a threat. Let's look at the Fortune 500 companies in the U.S. Embassy, and those guys are the threats." If you're going to have cover anymore, it's got to be that kind of a non-official, deep cover, and it's got to be really respected and taken care of. And you've got to pick just the diamonds in the rough, not this Fortune 500, come and be an intern for us and we'll turn you into a spy. That's not going to work.
I can't help but think that the only thing that will pull us out of this, just as a global force, a global human entity, is if aliens come. And I keep thinking, come on, aliens, save us all.
Yeah, but aliens, Western civilization treated all the new people that they've discovered, so that's, plus,
of course.
They'd have to be benevolent, and hopefully they have some cool technology that they'd want to give us just so we could play with it.
But if they were malevolent, then perhaps this world would band together finally. But it would be short-lived because the attention span is so short.
Yeah. And then my brother, he's one of the guys who says, well, the only thing that's going to change this country is if we get into another war, like World War II brought us all together. And that was true back then, but it was a completely different era. And now with the threats that we've talked about just during this time, if we went to war, it's not going to be a world war as such. And Guam's going to get hit, Okinawa's going to get hit, some ships are going to be sunk, and then politics will take place. And no American is going to go, let's go against the Chinese, because it'll be iffy. It'd be like, well, we shouldn't have probably done that. And, it's not like really a war. It's not like a D-Day war. And I don't want to be a military guy anyway, so I'm not going to go into the draft. And I don't think, that's why I say it's a generational problem. So generational problem means you have to start, first of all, you got to educate Americans in the civics. Most Americans don't even know what the U.S. government is, or that's divided into 3 branches. And, they couldn't answer you on the street. So if you don't even know what your own club is and what that club stands for and what it's driving to do, how are you going to support it? And how are you going to go, yeah, I'm an American and I want to be there for you? They don't even know what America is.
Yeah, that ship has definitely sailed, I think. Well, tell me the name of your book.
It's The Hidden. And the reason that's called The Hidden is because you have to remain hidden under the radar of China's surveillance state. And the hero, Griff Harkin, is that guy in Zambia that I was just describing. And he's a guy, and he's been there, and his girlfriend is a deaf Zambian. So she uses sign language. He uses sign language. He's got a group of kids that are just deaf on the street that he recruits as a surveillance team. They don't even have a recognized view of sign language because nobody's educated them. Because in Zambia and in many parts of the world, deafness is considered insanity or disease. So nobody's educated them. They've gotten by
gesticulations. Yeah.
That's what The Hidden means, is staying hidden below the radar. And that's what Griff Harkin does. CIA had to okay everything. They read the manuscript.
I got to ask, is it true that the CIA trained what laymen would consider psychic soldiers?
Yeah, it's true that they had a program back in the day, and the reason why is the Soviets had a program, and like I said, we were designed to go after the Soviets. So we found out the Soviets had a program. They're like, maybe we ought to look into this. And actually, I've never had anything particular to do with that operation, but I've talked to people in the agency who were like counter-terrorism guys who said, some of this stuff is kind of like, yeah, it worked. Like, they were looking for a guy, he was a senior general, was kidnapped by a terrorist force and abducted and taken somewhere. And they're remote viewers. Yeah. So the remote viewer, who was working on that, drew like an industrial place and like a green pup tent. Of course, what the CIA needs is, where is he? Where's an address? What city? That doesn't do anything for you. But when they found the guy, he was in an industrial area and he was in a green pup tent. You wonder.
Yeah. Well, I read the book, The Men That Stare at Goats, and that was such a great...
Oh, yeah. I saw that movie too. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the movie was more playful. The book is really fascinating. I would love to be a Pollyannic person who wears rose-colored glasses and just says, "Can't we all get along?" But I know the reality is not that. You have an open door to be on the show anytime. So absolutely, I've been delighted by this conversation, as intense as it got in some places.
Yeah. And we're in bad shape. Like I said, it's gonna take a lot to get back, any kind of a semblance of what the United States of America used to be. I'm not a pessimistic guy. I'm an optimistic guy, and I like to have fun and tell funny stories. But the truth is that we're in a bad way. I understand as an intelligence officer that to right the problems that are wrong, you can't do it like we were talking. You can't do it with a snap of the finger. You can't just say, "Okay, we understand," and have it done. And in fact, I think there's a trend among politicians to where politicians think if they acknowledge a problem, it's the same as solving it. So if people say, "Oh, China's our biggest threat," it's like, "Oh, okay, automatically it's taken care of." But no, China is our biggest threat. That means you got to build up a navy. The Department of Defense just slashed its budget, because it's trying to fit into continuing resolution budget deals. And they've been doing this for 5-7 years, and they don't have any money. They can't do planning. They can't get new stuff going. They can't start new programs because they don't have the money. So you can talk about, we need more submarines. We need more, destroyers. We need defenses in Guam. We need all this. But unless you fund it and the funding gets to the military and they use it for that purpose, it doesn't get done. And so all I've heard among politicians so far is acknowledging problems, but not doing anything to solve the problems.
Our politicians are spending far too much time arguing with each other to do any actual good. It's really frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Talk to you later. Bye.
Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks. Bye.